My name is Olivia Reyes. I'm 33 years old, a public relations officer for a National Veterans Association and a former military logistician. It's funny how life puts you in rooms where you're not wanted until you make it impossible to be ignored. I wasn't supposed to be at that gala in Washington, D.C. My name had vanished from the list, erased like a mistake. But I knew better than to shrink back into the shadows. I didn't come this far to be overlooked. That night, the air was heavy with perfume and pride, the kind of evening where handshakes mean more than words. The ballroom at the Willard Intercontinental was packed. Senators, donors, veterans in dress blues, and more cameras than I could count. I had received the invitation a month ago, but when I arrived, the young man at the door skimmed the list and shook his head. "I'm sorry, Ms. Reyes, you're not on here." His tone was clipped, his smile too tight. It wasn't a mistake. I could see it in his eyes. He recognized me, and he knew exactly why he was turning me away. 3 months prior, I'd published a report exposing misuse of veteran donations by the very foundation hosting that gala. I had receipts, literal ones. The fallout had been messy. They claimed I was ungrateful, too bold, and, of course, no longer welcome. That door was supposed to stay shut, but some doors open when you push back. I stepped aside for a moment. My palms were sweaty, heart pounding in my chest. I thought about leaving, but then I remembered something my grandfather used to say. "You've already marched through worse. Walk in like you own it." So I did. I straightened my back, took a deep breath, and walked right through that entrance with the salute I hadn't used since active duty. The guards at the inner door stood aside, unsure whether to stop me or stand at attention. The room went quiet. Not instantly, but like a wave moving through people. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Glasses stopped halfway to lips. Faces turned. I didn't wear a gown or designer heels. Just a navy blue blazer, slacks, and polished shoes. My medals weren't pinned to my chest. They were in my past, in my record, in every step I took on that marble floor. I walked like someone who had nothing to prove, but everything to remind them of. I saw them, board members, government officials, clustered around a long banquet table. Their eyes flickered with confusion, then discomfort. One of them, Diane Hargrove, the chairwoman, actually rose halfway, as if unsure whether to greet me or call security. I didn't stop. I walked past the hors d'oeuvres, past the donors whispering behind champagne flutes, past the screen where my name had once been scheduled to appear in the program. I took a seat at an empty table near the front. A few people stared, waiting for someone to confront me. No one did. Not at first. My phone buzzed in my pocket. 3 messages from colleagues asking, "Are you there? Did you make it in? What are you doing?" I didn't reply. I sat back and looked around. This wasn't about revenge. It was about presence. I was here because I had earned it. 10 minutes later, a man I recognized, a brigadier general named Stokes, walked over. He'd once written me a letter of commendation. "Reyes," he said, smiling. "Didn't expect to see you tonight." His voice carried enough weight to draw attention. I stood to greet him. "General," I nodded. Thought I'd remind the room what honor looks like. He chuckled and shook my hand, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. And in that moment, it happened. The room shifted. People rose. Not all, but enough. Enough to feel it. Enough to know that whether my name was on a list or not didn't matter. I wasn't invited, but I had arrived. And that, sometimes, is all it takes to change the story. The moment passed, but the silence lingered. I could feel it in the way people avoided eye contact, in how conversations restarted in hushed tones. The general's acknowledgement had unsettled the mood, and I knew exactly why. I represented something they couldn't control, truth wrapped in dignity. I wasn't just an uninvited guest. I was a reminder, and reminders make people uncomfortable, especially in rooms built on selective memory. Diane Hargrove eventually walked over. Her smile was taut, stretched too wide to be sincere. "Olivia," she began, her voice smooth like polished steel. "What a surprise. We weren't expecting you tonight." I stood, not to meet her halfway, but to make sure I wasn't looked down on. "You erased my name," I said calmly, "but not my record, not my work, not my voice." Her expression barely shifted, but her eyes betrayed the flinch. "We had a limited guest list," she replied. Security concerns, you understand. I tilted my head slightly. Interesting. Yet somehow every executive with a scandal in their inbox made it through. Her breath caught, but she recovered quickly. Let's not turn this into something uncomfortable. I smiled, just enough to make my point. Too late for that, Diane. The room stood still. That says everything. She walked away with the grace of someone trained to spin discomfort into poise. But the damage was done. People had seen the exchange. Some avoided me. Others watched with quiet curiosity. A few, former colleagues and low-level staffers, offered nods of subtle support. Not everyone in that room had power. Some were just surviving within it. I remembered that feeling all too well. One of them, Jasmine Chu, approached during the salad course. We'd worked together during a chaotic Afghanistan evac coordination. She was younger than me, sharper in numbers, and more cautious with confrontation. I saw what they did, she said quietly, sliding into the seat beside me. Your name was there last week. I checked. My jaw tightened. They're trying to erase my footprint, but they don't realize I've already left boot prints. She smirked, then turned serious. There's talk about you. Inside the foundation. Some think you went too far. I nodded. And others know I didn't go far enough. She leaned closer. They're planning to cut ties with the veteran housing program. Redirect funds to tech partnerships. Quietly, my stomach turned. That housing initiative was essential for dozens of families. Cutting it would be a betrayal of everything the foundation claimed to stand for. I thanked her, and she slipped away as discreetly as she'd come. My mind raced. This night wasn't about recognition anymore. It was about resistance. If they were moving to silence real change, I couldn't just sit there in defiance. I had to act. The gala had media present. I needed one camera, one microphone, one shot to break the silence for good. By dessert, I had my opportunity. A local news anchor, Rachel Vega, was making her rounds, doing interviews for a highlight segment. I caught her eye and gave a nod. We'd met years ago during a VA hospital story. She recognized me instantly and walked over with her cameraman trailing. Olivia Reyes, she said, microphone in hand. Surprised to see you here. I leaned slightly into frame. Funny thing about silence. It always makes the truth louder. The interview was brief, but every word hit like a hammer. I spoke of erasure, accountability, and the real faces behind the donation numbers. When it ended, Rachel gave me a look I hadn't seen in years. Not pity, not admiration. Respect. The kind that can't be bought or staged. The kind that builds movements. That night I came to be seen. But what I left behind was a message they couldn't ignore. By the time the video hit the newswire, I was already in my car. I didn't need to stay and watch the aftermath unfold in real time. I knew the effect my words would have. Within the hour, my phone was vibrating nonstop. Texts, emails, even a few missed calls from blocked numbers. The footage was raw, direct, and unmistakably authentic. In a room built on curated appearances, authenticity was dynamite. The next morning, the interview was trending on local feeds and spreading fast through veteran networks. I woke up to dozens of messages from fellow service members, community leaders, even strangers. One message stood out, a voice memo from a veteran named Marcus. He said, "They've tried to shut me out too. Watching you walk in like that, it gave me the courage to speak up." I listened to it twice, maybe 3 times. Of course, the backlash came too. The foundation released a carefully worded statement. "We regret the confusion regarding last night's guest list and reaffirm our commitment to transparency and inclusion." It was PR sludge, meaningless in tone, calculated in intent, but it showed they felt pressure. They were scrambling. That was a start. You don't issue statements unless the silence is cracking. Within 48 hours, a handful of journalists started asking deeper questions. Why was my name removed? What was the actual allocation of veteran aid funds? Suddenly, the gala's glitter faded under scrutiny. Donors began making quiet inquiries. A few even reached out to me directly. One woman, a retired lieutenant colonel and longtime benefactor, asked for a private call. "I didn't know, Olivia. I want to know more." That phone call turned into a meeting, and that meeting turned into momentum. I wasn't alone anymore. People were listening, not just applauding. It felt different. Real. I formed a small coalition, Jasmine included, of insiders willing to talk, anonymously at first. We started gathering documents, timelines, internal memos, not to burn the whole house down, but to clean it from the inside. I wasn't naive. There were risks. A few days after the gala, someone keyed my car. Another day, I received a call with no words. Just silence, breathing, then a hang-up. Little intimidation games. I'd faced worse in combat zones. These people wore suits and smiled at fundraisers, but their power games were just as ruthless. Still, I was prepared to fight smarter, not louder. Meanwhile, the public support kept growing. Veterans began sharing their stories under the hashtag, we remember her name. It wasn't just about me anymore. It became about every woman, every soldier, every voice that had ever been boxed out of their own narrative. The gala had tried to erase one name, but in doing so, they'd amplified thousands. The most surprising message came from General Stokes. He sent a handwritten note, rare these days. It read, "There's a time for quiet respect, and a time to raise hell for the right reasons. Thank you for knowing the difference." I stared at it for a long time. Sometimes validation doesn't need to be loud, just true. By the end of the week, a congressional subcommittee was informally looking into the foundation's financials. It wasn't official yet, but it was real. And it started with a deleted name. That's what they didn't count on. They thought silence would end the story. But silence, when broken the right way, can become the loudest sound in the room. A month after the gala, I stood on the steps of the Capitol. Not as a protester, not as a guest, but as a witness called to speak. The congressional hearing had officially begun. The foundation's directors were now under investigation for mismanagement of funds, and I had been invited to testify. It wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity. I had fought for my place in that room. Now, I'd use it to fight for others. The room was stark. No chandeliers or orchestras this time. Just cold lighting, microphones, and sharp questions. I sat down, adjusted the microphone, and began my statement. I spoke about the housing program, the donor misdirection, the silent silencing. I looked each committee member in the eye, refusing to shrink. "I didn't come here tonight because I wanted to be seen," I said. "I came because too many aren't." As I spoke, I saw Jasmine in the back row. She gave me a steady nod. Others from our coalition had submitted written testimony. One even went public. The wall of secrecy was cracking, not from one blow, but from many, sustained, deliberate, and undeniable. Truth, I'd learned, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers just loud enough to be heard by the right person, at the right moment. The hearing didn't end in fireworks. It ended in acknowledgments. The committee ordered a formal audit. Funding for the veteran housing program was reinstated temporarily pending review. It was a start. Slow, bureaucratic, but real. The same week, the foundation's board quietly announced a leadership reshuffle. Diane Hargrove stepped down. No press conference, just a line in a Monday email. I received no formal apology. I didn't expect one. What mattered was that the programs were being protected, and the people were no longer invisible. In a city obsessed with optics, the truth had made its way through, and I hadn't done it alone. The people who once whispered now stood beside me. Sometimes that's how movements begin. Not with thunder, but with stubborn, steady footsteps. A week later, I got invited to a different gala, this time hosted by a coalition of veterans' families. No red carpet, no curated guest list. Just folding chairs, potluck food, and real conversations. I was the keynote speaker, though I didn't read from a script. I spoke from memory. My name was erased, I began, but what I stood for stayed. Because what matters isn't where you're seated. It's what you stand for when you arrive. They clapped, not politely, but powerfully. I looked around the room. Old uniforms, worn hands, quiet strength. People who knew what it meant to be dismissed and what it took to be heard. I realized then that this wasn't the end of a fight. It was the beginning of a shift, from silence to voice, from exclusion to presence. The hashtag, We Remember, her name still appeared on social media. It evolved, used now for others. Lost soldiers, overlooked nurses, underpaid caretakers. It had become a reminder that no one's contribution should be buried for convenience. The spotlight didn't have to be on me anymore. It never should have been. I was just the beginning of a louder chorus. As I left that second gala, I walked out into the Washington night. The air was crisp, the city buzzing quietly behind me. I paused at the edge of the sidewalk, looking back once, not to admire the view, but to remember the journey, from erased to undeniable, from forgotten to forged. My name had been scratched out, but now it was etched in a place they couldn't touch: memory, truth, and change.